Well, to look now at a very busy week in federal politics, I'm joined now by three MPs from the different parties. Stephen McKinnon is a Liberal MP for Gatineau, and he's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services. Michael Cooper is a Conservative MP for the Alberta riding of St. Albert Edmonton, and he's his party's Deputy Justice Critic. And Matthew Dubé is a Deputy House Leader for the NDP and the member for the Montreal area riding of Belleuil-Chambly. All three of you, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the Prime Minister has had a very busy week between Washington at the beginning of the week and Europe at the end of the week. He was in Germany. He was questioned about NATO, and a pointed question about after Donald Trump's comments about NATO partners contributing more to the North Atlantic Alliance. He basically suggested that Canada is contributing its fair share. Stephen McKinnon, should Canada contribute more? We know that the United States has repeatedly asked us to contribute more.
Well, look, Canada contributes, I believe, the sixth most of any NATO country. We've always paid our fair share in NATO, and I think our troops have always been recognized as perhaps representing incremental value even in terms of their contributions. We have highly trained, well-equipped troops that, of course, converse in our two official languages, therefore can go into a diversity of theaters. We have troops right now in 3 theaters and deployed all over the world. Canada has nothing to be ashamed about in terms of its NATO obligations and in terms of its NATO commitments. Of course, we also have a number of major military procurements on the way for surface combatant ships, Coast Guard vessels, indeed, for the interim solution on fighter aircraft, and a whole bunch of other procurements that we've announced in the past weeks, and I know we'll be announcing others in the coming weeks. So, look, Canada has nothing to be ashamed about in terms of its NATO contributions, and I expect those contributions to continue to be both increasing and valuable.
But in the Prime Minister, in the same breath, he said that Canada had committed to the 2% goal, which was what every member was allegedly, it's an aspirational goal, 2% each country.
Yes.
But in the same breath, he said that that's enough, but we are only at 1% of direct contribution to NATO.
Well, look, I mean, I won't go into the details, but certainly in terms of calculating that 2% number, it depends what is included, whether policing activities, Coast Guard activities, other sorts of things that are perhaps accounted for by other countries are included in that total. But look, Canadians can rest assured that A, we do our fair share in NATO, and B, that aspirational goal of 2%, which has been long adopted by NATO member countries and long promoted by the United States through Democratic and Republican administrations, that debate will continue to go on, but Canada will come good to NATO and be very, very active in all NATO theaters.
Michael Cooper, after Conservative government of 9 years, that figure was more or less the same for the whole duration of the Harper government. Should Canada be sensitive to the fact that President Trump is pressuring once again Canada to contribite more?
Yeah, well, Canada has made an important contribution to NATO, and it's not just President Trump who has encouraged Canada to move towards 2% of GDP. In fact, President Obama last year called on Canada to increase its defense spending.
Right, so should we then? Should we?
Well, look, for 9.5 years, our Conservative government made significant investments in the Canadian Armed Forces. We increased defense spending from $14 billion when we came to office to $20 billion when we left office. But there is still more work to do, and certainly the goal should be to move towards 2%. Obviously, though, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But more than anything, what our military needs is long-term, sustainable and predictable funding from the federal government.
Okay, Matthew Dubé, on behalf of the NDP, what do you think the response from Canada should be to increased or continuing American pressure on this subject?
Well, it's interesting that the pressure comes from the new American administration, because I seem to recall them throwing into doubt the very existence even of NATO. And so I think that calls for Canada to play an evolving role over the coming months and years. I think the funding is part of it, but I also just think even in terms of a leadership role around the table, it's certainly going to be important. Canada has always played a strong role in these multilateral organizations, and I think it's that much more important given the unpredictability stability of our American friends and neighbors these days. And so I think it certainly bears a particular focus for the government, and certainly the going towards that 2% funding is something that we hope the government continues to move towards.
Okay, I want to get to something else that took up a lot of attention this week, and some people were surprised that it did claim as much attention and as much energies from MPs in the House of Commons. On Wednesday, there was a private member's motion from Iqra Khalid, and she basically, her motion was asking the House of Commons to condemn or to denounce, quote, the Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination. That was on Wednesday. It gave rise to quite a lot of debate, and but that was on Tuesday. By Wednesday, there was a debate, or a full-fledged debate the next day. There was a full-fledged debate on an opposition motion from the Conservatives asking the House to condemn all forms of systemic racism, religious intolerance and discrimination of Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, and other religious minorities or communities. Two battling resolutions, basically aiming at the same thing. I want to ask you, and as you go home to your ridings, a lot of people are going to say, well, why are you arguing and having battling resolutions over something which seems to many people a very important and fundamental thing to be able to vote on? Steve McKinnon.
Well, look, it's important to remember this resolution was presented last December, and in the intervening time we had the highly unfortunate, tragic incident at the mosque in Quebec City. Look, in Canada we've never hesitated to denounce hatred in all its forms, discrimination in all its forms. When it's discrimination against Jews, we call it anti-Semitism. When the Polytechnique disaster occurred, we called it gender discrimination. There have been other incidents involving the LGBTQ community and many, many others that I won't list. But when we're dealing with something as identifiable as this, we in the Liberal Party will never hesitate to stand up and denounce something and call it by its name. And in this case, that is Islamophobia. What is unfortunate is that this debate indeed has been politicized. It's been politicized by those unfortunately fringe elements, perhaps in the alt-right, websites and what have you, who are whipping up an absolute misinformation campaign about this motion. It's a motion, it's not a law, it's not a bill, and it's an expression of the will of the House of Commons. And something that I think very similarly got unanimity last October in the House of Commons now has turned into a bit of a political fight because the Conservative Party cannot seem to make up its mind. Some leadership candidates are whipping this up, others are intending to vote for it, but the Conservative Party doesn't seem to be able to make up its mind that this is something that deserves to be denounced and denounced by its name.
Okay,
and
now I want to give time to...
That's why we're moving forward.
I want to give time to all parties involved in this. Now, Michael Cooper, the point has been made that there was a petition in October which denounced Islamophobia, and Conservatives present in the House voted for that petition, voted for that motion. Yeah. So it condemned Islamophobia. Your replacement opposition motion the next day has removed the term Islamophobia. What's the problem?
Well, it actually is the Liberals who are playing politics with this issue. And in terms of M103, we're going to have a free vote, something that Prime Minister Trudeau talked a lot about during the campaign, but hasn't seemed to deliver on when it comes to his own Liberal MPs.
Right, but why the need to replace one resolution with another without the word Islamophobia? Well,
certainly freedom of religion is a fundamental freedom in Canada, and discrimination based upon religion and hate based upon religion is a direct threat to religious freedom. And we saw that with the very terrible incident in Quebec City. And so what we have simply done is put forward a motion. It's a very straightforward motion to condemn all forms of religious discrimination, including against the more than 1 million Muslim Canadians.
But why is it a problem now, though, when in October the Conservatives in the House were able to vote for a resolution that condemned Islamophobia?
We have some concerns with the wording of the motion. Islamophobia is not defined, and there is some concern that rather than condemning discrimination against Muslim Canadians, that this motion will be used to attack freedom of expression, a legitimate freedom of expression.
Okay.
And that's something that we don't support.
Okay, Matthew Dubé, I have to ask you, you have two motions. The opposition motion, without the term Islamophobia, will be voted on next Tuesday. The Liberal private members motion will be voted on sometime in April. What is the NDP going to do?
We're going to vote in favor of both of them. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just important that we start tackling this issue. Certainly, with tragic events that have happened here and around the world, people have become more and more sensitized to the consequences of discrimination and hate against all religions, all communities, regardless of what form that discrimination or hatred might take. And I think that being said, as parliamentarians, we have a responsibility to sit down and see what we can do to support these communities, both through presenting bills or otherwise, whatever work can be done. That's what both these motions are calling for, studies in committee and so forth. And so for us, it's pretty simple. Let's vote for both of these and get down to it.
Okay, Steve McKinnon, how do you respond when a former Justice Minister, your former colleague, someone you know very well, Irwin Cotler, when asked yesterday about it, point blank, he said, you know what, the private members motion, Iqra Khalid's private members motion, given that there's reservations about the term Islamophobia, it would have been just as effective and it would have passed if she would change the term just to prejudice or discrimination or bigotry against Muslims.
Well, you know what?
That's the former Justice Minister who himself had a petition in the House of Commons pass on anti-Semitism.
Well, we respectfully disagree. We are calling this what it is. We are not saying, like these conservatives seem to be, that it is time to denounce discrimination against all forms of religion. And in the wake of the Polytechnique, we did not denounce discrimination against men and women. We were denouncing discrimination, in that case, of course, against women.
Right, but the motion does also say discrimination against Islamophobia and all other forms of systemic discrimination against religion. So it is a wide-ranging motion, but you're sticking no matter what then to the term Islamophobia, even if some people like Irwin Cotler would say, look, why fight on that hill if you can achieve the same thing by just saying it's discrimination against Muslims?
Yes, we are, and it's very important to point out here that the Conservative Party is not able to muster itself to be able to denounce this for what it is, which is Islamophobia, and especially true in the wake of the Quebec City incident. And look, Martin, what's really important here to know is that the Liberal Party will stand up for the rights of all Canadians. Will stand up against discrimination and against hatred in all its forms, wherever you live and whoever you are in this country. That's the country we live in. That's the country that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms envisages. And when the Liberal Party and hopefully all parliamentarians detect this kind of hatred and some of the bile that's coming out from different quarters in Canadian society, we will stand up to that and we will denounce it.
Right. You won't be able to vote then for the Conservative motion.
Well, we think it's a watering down, and we think it's unfortunate that the Conservative Party are unable, again, to call this what it is.
And when they say that they approached you in a more moderate manner weeks ago, asking for a possible amendment to change the wording so it would be acceptable to everyone, they accuse you of baiting, of creating this.
Well, again, sometimes there are principles. The principle that we invoke in this case is that of calling this form of discrimination for what it is. Islamophobia against this particular group, and we won't hesitate to do that, whoever you are in Canada, if hatred and discrimination becomes a problem in any corner of the country.
Okay, well, on that note, I want to thank all three of you. Thanks for taking part, and have a great weekend in your ridings.
Thank you.
Thank you.